Okay, hello. Welcome. This is Yoga Talks Podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate it. It's a pretty big day today. We have Judith Hanson Lasater on. And I was very excited to talk to her. She's somebody I admire very much. I've never studied with her directly, but I have received teaching from her indirectly. And her name is mentioned in my class. She's somebody who I really draw upon. I think she's an important voice in the yoga world. And I had fun talking with her. I have to say, though, it was an interesting example of something. For those of you who are new to the podcast, I sometimes like to do these intros where I talk about myself. Some people like that, and some people don't like that. Those of you who've been listening know I've been obsessing recently with feedback that I've been getting from folks. And I've decided to really try to get away from that. Like, I'm going to stop reading reviews for a little while. I talked with Jenny Lynn Carson from Yoga Dork. She's going to be on the podcast next month. And she said, I never read comments or reviews because it makes me doubt myself. And I think that that's really sort of been happening. Like, I get 3 reviews of people telling me, I love what you're doing. And then I get 1 review of someone telling me, you're horrible. You got to stop interrupting. And then I can kind of really start to doubt myself. And that's not helpful. And I do want to, as I said last week, I really do want to be a better listener. But when I went to talk with Judith, I'm not trying to make excuses for myself, but the cards were a little bit stacked against me. You see, my wife was working that day, and I was taking care of the children, and then my wife was supposed to be home at a certain time. She got home later than we thought. So I basically just handed the children off to her. I ran downstairs. I turned everything on, and boom, I'm recording with Judith Hanson Lasater. Now, I had planned to have some time to center myself and do some breathing and get myself into a state where I could really take in what people have been telling me and be more in a listening state. But I was not that way at all. I was just rolling with the day and rolling with the conversation. And you know what? I had fun. Judith's great. She's super fun to talk to. But I did have this question that I wanted to ask her, which is a controversial question. And I debated whether I should do it or not. I was concerned. I worried that it was something maybe she didn't want to talk about publicly. I don't know. It wasn't like I cleared it with her in advance, and I didn't want to be like some kind of gotcha situation. I really love Judith and consider her a friend, and I didn't want it to feel like I was bringing her on the podcast and then like putting her in an uncomfortable situation. And it took me a while to get up the nerve to finally ask her the question. I do ask her the question. And I wonder if I hadn't waited that long, if she would have answered it the same. And her answer is very significant. I think Judith speaks to some very important things in this talk, in my opinion. But, I wasn't as in a listening state as I would have liked. And she corrects me a couple of times, and I'm exposed. And that's why I feel like in these intros I want to be exposed too. And, today was a rough day. It was a rough day for me. And actually what happened today bears relevance to our podcast that I'm going to put out in 2 weeks. So maybe I'll tell you about that on the other side. So after we listen to Judith, I'm going to tell you about the day that I had today. And if you're interested in listening, you can listen. If not, you can just turn it off after I'm done talking to Judith. And then that's going to lead into the intro to the next podcast, which I'm kind of excited about because it's not a yoga teacher. It is a Academy Award-winning producer and documentary filmmaker who made this film that I saw that I was really into, and I got to talk to her. And the difficulties that I've been having, that I've been talking about some on this podcast, I think aren't just specific to me. I do think that there's things going on in our broader spheres, and I think her movie speaks to that. So on the other side of this talk, if you're interested, I'll tell you what happened today. But for now, I want to plug my stuff, and I want to give you a promo code because we got Judith Hanson Lasater on the podcast. So in honor of Judith Hanson Lasater, we're doing a promo. If you go to jbrownyogavideo.com and you use promo code Judith15, that's Judith15, you can get 15% off any of the practice videos or the online course. That's jbrownyogavideo.com, promo code Judith15. Okay, what else? Nothing else. I think that's good. Let's just go ahead and talk to Judith. Hi, Judith. How are you?
Fine. I'm sorry. I was a few minutes late. I had a Spanish lesson today.
No problem.
And I told him we needed to end about 10 after, but we got so excited about the subjunctive that we suddenly realized it was late, so I came running up.
Wow, you're studying Spanish. You know, I've been trying to learn some Japanese because I've been traveling there, but it's so hard.
Japanese is extremely difficult.
Yeah.
Because first of all, the letters, like...
I know. I mean, I picked up a little bit, but I also don't practice. You got to practice.
Domo arigato. Arigato gozaimashita. That's all I know.
Gozaimashita. So are we good? Have you got it? I've got you at a good moment. You're settled. Do you need to get anything?
I'm good.
All right. Cool.
Let me turn off my phone.
That's good.
Yeah. Let me turn off my iPad.
Yes, the devices.
Computers, they rule the world. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good today. It was a bit of a long day. You know, my wife, she works freelance, and she got work today. So I was on daddy duty all day. I picked up the reins. Nothing
is more exhausting than taking care of children.
Oh, gosh, it was a long day. But they were well behaved for me. So
You're just children.
That made it nice.
That makes it nice.
Made it easier. How about you? What did you do today besides Spanish class?
I did my yoga. I went to spinning class. I took a nap.
Nice.
I got my office sort of organized to work,
Yeah.
Everything in neat stacks and a list and stuff like that.
Mm.
And then I got caught up in email. It's a typical Monday. And then I have my Spanish class. And now I'm talking to you. And then I'm going to go have dinner with my son, his wife, and 3 grandchildren.
That sounds like a pretty good day to me.
Then I'm going to get in bed and read a book and fall asleep, trying to keep my eyes open. Sounds like a great day.
That's like...
I worked out last week, so...
Yeah.
So let's do this. What are we doing?
All right, we're talking, and I want to thank you. I appreciate you talking to me. We've talked once before. I don't know if you remember. I called you, took my call, you answered some questions for that article I wrote. I really appreciate it then, and I appreciate you talking to me again today. It's nice to have a little of your time. I appreciate it.
Yep, you're welcome.
So, I've been doing these podcasts with people, and it's become sort of like a document of stuff. And you're such a seminal figure in the yoga world. You've been around for as long as I've known anything about yoga. And I guess my first sort of place I want to start is, I know that you've cited Mr. Iyengar as one of your main teachers, but did you practice yoga before you met Mr. Iyengar? Like, what was your first ever yoga class?
It's Iyengar.
Iyengar, forgive me.
Yeah, of course. No forgiveness necessary. Yes, I started studying yoga in 1970, and it was in the Shivananda tradition.
Huh.
And my teachers were trained in that tradition, and that was how I learned it.
I see. So how long had you been practicing yoga in the Shivananda tradition before you met Mr. Iyengar?
Well, that's not an easy question, because during the first few months of my teaching, I was given Light on Yoga, the book, by Mr. Iyengar, by a student of mine. And I, like all good yoga students, I didn't read the book. I just turned to the back and looked at the poses.
Well, most of it's pictures, so there's lots to look in there.
And I thought to myself, no one can do these poses. but I kept the book, and then I got married a few months later. We were trying to figure out what to do, so we moved out to the country to his parents' ranch and lived in an old it was a big old rambling house with a screened-in porch. It was a former foreman's house. I looked out the kitchen window one day, and a cow was looking in at me. And we kind of figured out what we wanted to do next when it entailed moving to California so we could both do what we wanted to do. And while I was
what was that? What was in California that you wanted to do?
Well, he wanted to go to graduate school in energy policy, and I wanted to go to physical therapy school. And there were 3 places we could both do that, and it didn't snow in San Francisco, so that's where we went.
I see. And so physical therapy school, that was coming out of your experience with Shivananda. What was that about? Why was that?
No, I wanted to be a better yoga teacher, and this looked like, well, actually, let me back up, because there's more to the story. All right. So it's always good to back up and slow down.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's relax and renew, right?
When I was living in the countryside, way out in the big fat middle of nowhere, I picked up that book and I started trying to do the poses. So I feel like he was teaching me then, and that was in 1972. I was trying to do these poses, and I'm sure that I was missing the point of them, but
that was what you did before there were online courses. Right? You practiced off the book, right?
Yeah, this was the old-fashioned way.
Yeah.
So I looked at the book, and then we moved in August of 72 out to San Francisco. Now, there was also, before I left, there was a very strange thing happened to me living in Austin and teaching yoga.
So you were teaching yoga in 1972 in Austin? No,
71.
71.
July of 71.
And what was that like? So there was organized group classes in 1971?
They had started the previous spring. They had started in the spring of 71. And I wandered in the Y one day, didn't want to be a teaching assistant for my graduate degree in government for the second year. The students were so apathetic, drove me insane. And I wandered in the Y one day, and they just had decided 10 minutes ago to have a job as a program associate. They hired me, and as a perk of my job, I got to take yoga. So I took yoga every day, and after the first day I took yoga, I totally fell in love. I got up the next morning and practiced whatever I remembered. That was it. I crossed the Rubicon, and I started buying every yoga book.
And there probably wasn't that many, because I'm saying, because even when I came in like the early 90s, it still wasn't like it is now.
Lots of books. There was Yoga, Youth, and Reincarnation by Jess Stearns, Stearns, and there was Swami Vishnunanda,
the illustrated book, right?
Yoga, and there were some philosophy books which went over my head, but there was something.
Yeah.
And so I started practicing on my own, and then 10 months into my practicing life, my teachers moved away to Seattle and asked me to take over a 200-person yoga program, which I cavalierly agreed to do.
Wow, so that was not with any formal yoga teacher training. That was old school. You just showed up every day.
Yeah, and it was, practice with the teachers. And then I started teaching in July. And I started in September, and in July I started teaching. And I loved teaching.
And that was taking over a center, is that what you said?
No, it was at the Y.
I see.
And the classes cost $1.
Well, that was my first teaching experience too. It was before, even I came in right before these 200-hour trainings came about. And I remember I was just always at the center, and someone knew me from class, and they said, I have this class at the Y, do you want it? And I said, sure. And that's the first class I ever had, just the same. But that was in 1995.
The Y has done so much for yoga.
Yeah, really.
So I took over these classes, and very quickly, I realized I didn't know enough. And so I looked around, and then we got married in January and moved to the country. And one morning I woke up and I told my husband, now my ex-husband, but I told my husband, I said, I want to be a physical therapist. And he said, oh, okay. What do they do? I don't know. Have you ever been to one? No. Do you know anyone who's been to one? No. But this is what I want to do. I got it just in my sleep without any hesitation. That's what I want to do. And he said, okay. And I want to go study. He got interested in Buckminster Fuller and energy policy and, the whole way. If you know much about Buckminster Fuller,
a little bit,
his way of looking at the world. He wanted to go to energy policy school. At Berkeley. So we decided, and we packed up, and 6 weeks later we moved to California. But before I left, I had one day, now I was a graduate student, but one day I hadn't read the undergraduate newspaper that came out every day. I hadn't read it for a year, 2 years. And I picked it up one day, totally by chance, turned to the back, and there was a small classified ad. And it said, yoga teachers, take a yoga class with J.B. Rishi, and there was a phone number. So
J.B. Rishi, who's J.B. Rishi?
He was a man who had studied with Iyengar, and he was traveling around the country with Karen Steffen, who still teaches in Boston, and I still know. Uh-huh. And they were in Austin. So I went to take the class, and I was the only person there. Mm. And Jean-Bernard Richi did not speak English, and I did not speak French. So he just put me in the poses, the Iyengar poses. And I'll never forget, I did headstand. He picked me up by my ankles, shook me out like a rag doll, and plopped me back down on my head. So I did that.
And you enjoyed that.
Well, I went through it. And what was so odd is I would go every afternoon to that class, and then I would go teach. And there was something so compelling about what he was teaching me. And then I would go teach Shivananda yoga. And I actually did not teach Iyengar yoga for 3 years. I did it, but I didn't teach it.
And that was the precursor to going to study physical therapy.
When we got to San Francisco Bay Area, I think we lived in Berkeley then, we got forwarded a flyer because our mother-in-law and father-in-law are forwarding our mail, and they sent us a flyer that J.B. Rishi was going to be in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. So we went to that class because I had him before, in Austin. Total, coincidence, everything. And included in the mail, she sent us $50 or $100 bill just to be nice.
Who sent you who sent you $100 bill?
My mother-in-law. Okay. She forwarded the mail and she sent us $100.
She said, "Here's the price of the ticket."
Yeah, each one was $50. So we got to go to that, and that's where I really met Karen and have known her ever since. And that was another consolidation of my work. But of the Iyengar influence. But what was so interesting was at that workshop, I met the main Bay Area teachers. In those days, I had either heard of or knew every independent yoga teacher in the Bay Area.
Well, I'm glad that you bring that up because I think of you as like one of, if not one of the first independent yoga teachers. Because you were a sole operator. But first, I want to say one thing because it was interesting to me that you were like, oh, physical therapy, wanting to be a better yoga teacher. It makes sense, that if yoga practice is this engaging of the body and it's about health, well, sort of what's the kind of Western equivalent of that in a sense?
Yeah.
Physical therapy would be some kind of equivalent idea in terms of how you address people with their health, through their bodies.
Well, if I realized that, if I was going to be telling people what to do with their body, I should know more about it. But I also want to tell you that at that time, there was no really, as you say, there was no such thing as an independent yoga teacher. There were people who lived at the Shivananda
Ashram,
Ashram,
what I mean, yeah.
Yellow shirts and white baggy pants, and taught yoga with Sanskrit names. But they weren't like independent. And I think I was one of the first people to create the concept of a profession of independent yoga teacher in the U.S. So I knew that, or I wondered let's put it that way. I wondered if I could actually make a living teaching yoga. So
back then too.
So I thought I need an ace in my back pocket. Yeah. Because PTs...
That was like a fallback plan. It's just a smart fallback plan.
PTs can be trainers. We can work scoliosis clearing. We can do massage. We're licensed to touch people. there's a lot of options. And so that's a whole other story how I got into school, because they had 750 applicants and they only took 40. And that's a whole other story.
All right. Well, let's go back on the other track then. Let's get back onto, so now you go to this workshop in San Francisco, you meet a lot of the other, what there are of other independent yoga teachers.
Yeah.
And you're studying Iyengar. So how does it go from there? How do you end up studying directly with Iyengar? You decide, I want to work with this guy. I want to learn more from him.
So what we did was we formed an association, California Yoga Teachers Association, very grandiose. And we got together and we started collecting members, and we would get together, and have potlucks, and we would discuss yoga. And then we decided to form a school, and in 1974 we opened a school, an independent school called the Institute for Yoga Teacher Education.
This is all before you met Mr. Iyengar?
Uh-huh. And then I was teaching his method a bit. And then he had come to, one of our members had been to India and met an American who lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And it was Mary Dunn's mother. And she had met Iyengar in India and invited him to come. So in 1973, he went to Ann Arbor, Michigan. And then one of the members of CITA, California Yoga Teachers Association, who I knew, one of the teachers, had been in India and had met Mary's mother, Mary Dunn's mother, and therefore cooked up a scheme to bring Iyengar back in 1974 and bring him to the Bay Area. And that's the first time I met him. Okay. Although I had been practicing his method for what I thought was his method for 3 years. But I also want to tell you that while I was doing the PT thing, I went to California Institute of Integral Studies, and I studied East-West psychology and got a PhD and took 2 years of Sanskrit and studied
So can you translate Sanskrit?
What?
Does that mean you can translate Sanskrit?
No, I can't translate so much, but I can read the Devanagari script.
Wow.
And I started learning it. And
so you really immersed yourself in yoga. You just this is my thing.
I wanted to dig a very deep well, and I wasn't interested in all the associative, new agey things, hippie new agey things. I just wanted to go deeply into yoga, and that's what I've done. That's what I've done, and everything has flowed from that. So then I met Mr. Iyengar in 1974. He came back in 1976. Then I decided to go to India, and a few months later went on the first of my 3 trips to India to study directly with him there. And I also studied with him in Wisconsin. Where was it we went? Where is the University of Wisconsin? Madison.
Okay.
Yeah, but in 1976, he had an invitation-only 50-person workshop in Madison, Wisconsin. I went there too. But I ended up going 3 times and then studying with him whenever he came here.
And during that period, would you say that you shifted and you were teaching a Iyengar method?
Yes. No, I remember the day that it was probably in 1974 where I was teaching a class at some little alternative health center in Berkeley, and people would come in and lie down on their mats, and we did Shivananda yoga. And then one day I turned on the light and I said, okay, everybody stand up. I want to teach you this new pose called Trikonasana. And I lost half my students. But then it started growing like gangbusters.
I see. All right. So I wanted to get there because that's interesting to me that you had all of that precursor to your teaching of a Iyengar method, because nowadays you are known as like the restorative yoga queen, and that's something that you've really pioneered. And I know that you have, cited a lot of that from, Mr. Iyengar's innovative use of props. He's the one who started that. But my question is that my experience, I've never studied with you directly, but I should say that your teachings happen in my class and in the classes at my center a lot because they've funneled through, your students to me, and you're always cited. So your name happens a lot in my class. And what is interesting to me is I use teachings that I have gotten secondhand from you often to, as diplomatic as I can say it, sort of have to undo teachings that people have received in Iyengar classes. And so it seems to me that you did really break from that method. Like even just in terms of the use of props, like let's just start there. You know, I've been in Iyengar classes where we have prop setups and we might stay in a pose for a while. But that never was the same experiences that I've had when I've done some restorative, relax and renew practice that someone has taught me from what they learned from you. Even though we're using props and we're using poses, the experience is very different. So I'm wondering what changed for you? What did you do differently? Where did you part from that Iyengar method in what you do now?
Okay, this is a really significant question because it touches on a lot of different things. Mm-hmm. So let me do inverted pyramidal style. Let me talk about the major things and then go down like a pyramid doing Shirshasana to the individuation of this.
Cool.
So yoga began, there's, who knows when, but yoga started in India, right? Mm-hmm. That's just what we know. And it developed in a culture, and there is nothing that develops, speaking from my anthropological self, nothing that develops technology, social structures, language, music, culture, everything is always in a context that has to do with climate, diet, religion. I mean, all of it is such a, I want to speak Spanish now because I just was in my Spanish class. a big mix of all these factors. And so we've taken this flower of yoga that grew in a certain climate, in a certain religion, in a certain culture, with certain historical viewpoints, blah, 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 language. And there's a lot of literature about how language affects our perception and our perception affects our language. The old hack about Eskimos have 18 words for snow kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And if I have snow or no snow or maybe wet snow, dry snow, but that, so perception and language. So all those factors just in a stew, in a pot, and we took out this flower of yoga and we plopped it down in a culture that is not only geographically exactly on the opposite side of the world, but from a completely different pot. The Northern European, and now the United States is even more mixed up, which makes for great restaurants. And so we have everything is different. Worldview, language, religion, history, many values. All right. So now yoga is going to take on, and has to, like water takes on the shape of its container, the practice of yoga takes on the shape of the culture. It affects the culture, but the culture affects it. And let me give you a little story about that. Mm-hmm. So years ago, I started getting a lot of people from the San Francisco Zen Center coming to my yoga class. And the San Francisco Zen Center was the first non-Japanese religious Zen center. It was a Zen center for Westerners, and it was the first one in the country. And this very strong and thriving community. So the Zen students liked Iyengar yoga because it didn't have a lot of Hindu culture trappings. Mm-hmm. And so it didn't conflict with their practice, and it felt very clean and clear and very Zen-like to them. So they started coming to my classes, and I got to know lots of people who became leaders of the Zen community from that I knew a long time ago when we were practically kids. So they said one day, why don't you come to evening Zazen and have dinner with us? We'd love to show you the Zen Center. So I go and I do the sitting, 40-minute sitting, and then we do a bowing ceremony, very, very Japanese, right? Bowing ceremony and chanting. Then we go to dinner. And at dinner, they said, well, what did you think? And I said, it seems very Japanese. And they kind of laughed. I said, why are you laughing? And they said, because when the Zen monks come from Japan periodically to teach us, they giggle that it's so American.
Right. So right. It's all relative.
That being said, I'm a Westerner.
Yeah.
A woman. all the things that make me, my astrological chart, my Myers-Briggs, my gender, my religion, my upbringing, blah, 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 blah. So I study with BKS Iyengar, and I have an experience that I think, as anyone would say, is my own. And my experience with him was one of integration of the whole of yoga into this particular practice. So the first time I took a class with him, he taught us Tadasana, mountain pose, standing, and he started picking on me verbally, like, you call yourself a yoga teacher, you can't even stand on your own 2 feet, blah, 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 in his style. And my first response was, I felt sorry for myself. Like, in my internal dialogue was, why is he picking on me? Poor little me. I'm doing the best I can. Should leave me. No, I'm sorry. I beg your pardon. The first reaction was, this was 1974, so you'll forgive me for not remembering.
Yes, of course.
The first response was irritation. Like, who? My pitta self. Like, oh, go on. Just leave me alone. What's your problem? I'm doing the best I can. Get over it. And then he continued. I was the second to the front. Just one person was in front of me because he lined us up by height. Because he had taught in the Army, so he lined us up by height.
Okay.
And then the second part was I started feeling sorry for myself. And all of a sudden, in a blinding flash of the obvious, I got it. That he was teaching me about the way I thought and believed and interacted in the world by this pose. And I looked up at him, and I flashed him this massive grin, and he flashed me a massive grin back, and he never picked on me again. And so my experience with studying with him was not what everybody, so many other people think, like the development of the standing poses to a fine art,
Yeah, let me ask you a question quickly about that then. In that Tadasana that he was teaching you, did he teach you to axially extend, or did he let you have the natural curves of your spine?
Natural curves. But the point I'm making is he then started talking about all the yogas. He said, your feet are bhakti yogas, and they press the earth with devotion, and your thighs are karma yogis, and they do the job of holding up your body. And he just went through, I wish I could remember it. I didn't write it down. I was so stunned at because to me it was an integration, that the asana became an expression of all the yogas. And so what has happened is the props, the alignment, and the standing poses. I think he developed the standing poses to a fine art. But that's what people get from Iyengar yoga. And so when I see Iyengar yoga class, to me, they're really taught in the West. They're so dry. They're all about move the kidney skin 1/4 inch to the left and live. And it's not the experience that I had with his work.
Well, I've heard you say that. I've heard you say that when you learned from him, he taught you to look at poses as like a question, that there wasn't a right. But
yeah, because he'd come in. The first time he came to the Bay Area in 1974, he put books on our feet in headstand because he wanted our feet flat, because he really wanted us to use our legs in headstand. So we're all faithfully doing it in 1976 when he comes back. We don't use the books anymore, but we are flattening our heels. And he says, who told you to do that? Now lift from the inner ball of the foot. And we're like looking at each other, because at first we didn't get that he was not teaching us.
So how did that happen then? That now it's always there is a right when you go to a Iyengar class now. That changed? Like, why? Because when I went to many Iyengar classes, and I was taught to axial extend and everything. I was taught to wrap my shoulders down and pull them down. There was all these you have to keep straight legs in down dog. There's very specific things now that are like their signatures. When people come in, I can tell that they're Iyengar practitioners. And that seems, what those people are showing me, it seems contrary to what your experience of Iyengar yoga was.
Well, how much trouble are you willing for me to get into in this talk?
I want to get into all the trouble. Let's get into all of it.
All right.
I've got a reputation, so I'm curious, because this is what I find interesting. Because I'm inspired by your work, and I use your work to address things that I think are problematic. What people present.
Here's the deal, Lucille.
All right.
I think it's, as one matures, as the practice seeps in, you understand that the awareness.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.